Alright. The avionics package on Air Force One in a movie that I'm inclined to invent was tampered with by someone whose, well, political affiliation was not pleasant. That is not in accord with their top secret clearance. What they did, in effect, was they have a simulation program in the avionics package that basically tests the calibration of the fuel delivery system in Air Force One and all other such craft. The simulation is designed to calibrate the fuel control system and also measure the intake and output of fuel. So what happened was this person, well, I'll call it a person, this person with, well, bad intent, malicious intent, actually put the simulation into a mode where up was down and down was up. That is to say, it looked like it was actually not in a simulation mode, but it was. And so Air Force One's flying along, anyway, it potentially could be flying along, and thinking that everything's good with the aircraft, that is, it has adequate fuel supply, the engines are operating normally, etc., etc., etc. But it's simulation. And actually the fuel could be leaking massively from the aircraft, assuming there's no sensors that would detect a fuel leakage. Now if this were to occur, the plane might suddenly flame out. All engines at 0% thrust. I know that because I actually thought about becoming a member of the Air Force at one time, working on jet aircraft. I really had a keen interest in jet aircraft and their engines. So if this was true, Air Force One would be flying along from one place to another, hypothetically. This is a treatment for a film. I'm a filmmaker. My name is Windfall. I have the film company called Mercury Grass Films. Great movie. Great movie. It would be a wonderful flick. But anyway, it flames out, and of course what happens is it starts dropping like a rock. Well, the thing is that you have this potential for the plane to glide, assuming it has enough altitude, to a safe landing, even if it's on the, well, even if it's in an airfield, or, well, even if it's in a wooded area or on the ocean. But let's say the control surfaces, i.e. the rudder and the flaps and other things, were also compromised by the same malicious individual. What would happen is Air Force One would crash, because it would try, the pilots would struggle mightily to bring the aircraft into a correct altitude, that is, a correct attitude. In other words, they would try to make it fly level enough so that it would actually glide to a landing, and therefore everybody on board would be safe. But if the avionics package, that is, the controls themselves are tampered with by this malicious individual, Air Force One would crash. Now, if Air Force One crashed, presumably, assuming the crash was devastating, everyone would die, including President Obama or the other presidents. The future president, of course, is Hannah Truly. Hannah Truly is the first woman president, and she actually became the president in 2023, which is an odd year because there's not supposed to be an election that year, but still, it happened. And she died. She was flying from Burma back to DC and died because the plane crashed. Now, the question is, what would you do if, say, you were a filmmaker and you wanted to make the screenplay very dramatic? What would you do to prevent this tragedy? You don't want to see a sad film. If you want to see a sad film, watch Sullivan's Travels. It's a very sad film. It's about a man who's rich and makes a filmmaker, and he decides to investigate the poor during the Depression and finds out, oddly enough, the poor are evil. The homeless people are nasty and mean. And so he ends up in prison because he can't remember who he is. Anyway, then suddenly he decides, I'm a filmmaker. My name is Sullivan. And then he reads that Sullivan's been murdered. Well, he decides to flip the coin, that is, take a chance and say he murdered Sullivan. That is, he murdered himself. But the film that I'm thinking about, which I won't call Air Force One, I think it will call it Fermat's Complaint. It is Fermat, the mathematician, who unfortunately didn't have enough writing space in his notebook, and said he couldn't write the proof to Fermat's big theorem, which is a great mathematical artifact. So, I have to tell you this. The only way you could detect this is to have somebody, oddly enough, who had traveled through time and had seen the report that was finally issued by historians centuries later on what the reason why Air Force One crashed in 2013 or 2023 or whatever. And this person, this entity, would have to transmit this information very carefully back to the time when it could be used to effectively stop a tragedy from happening. And they'd have to change time, change history. So the way the president or anybody can be protected is to have time travelers active in your vicinity. If you have a time traveler active in your vicinity, it's like a cop on the beat. They can keep you safe, but only if you cooperate. If you don't, all hell breaks loose. Anyway, this is Windfall. Kiss my butt. No, fuck you. No, I love the ladies, but don't tell anybody. Shh.